So, yeah, Brother Dan's out. He deserves a little bit of weight. He does a lot. Obviously, everybody knows kind of Dan's schedule with his traveling. I told him it's fine. I'll take this one as long as he doesn't miss any during Song of Solomon. That's my only rule. I don't embarrass all that easy, but I also don't want to put it to the test either. So today we're going to be in Ecclesiastes. We got 5 chapters to get through. So Ecclesiastes chapter 5 through 10 is the lesson for this morning. Ecclesiastes is, as far as certainly this quarterly, Ecclesiastes is a very special book to me. It was actually one that very shortly after my salvation that I read, and it resonated with me a lot. It was because I had just freshly come out of the whole under the sun kind of mentality that we'll go through, where everything was pointless and vain, and then I had just gotten born again. I'd seen, accepted the salvation that we're offered, and then there were some other things going on in our lives with just the family and everything else that it really hit me really very deeply. I actually took and I typed up the entire book of Ecclesiastes with whatever notes that I'd known at the time, the things that I was kind of learning. Word for word, comma for comma, I typed up the whole thing. I spent a lot of time in Ecclesiastes a couple years back, and so when it came up, and then Dan said that I was going to have to fill in, not that I was obviously comfortable to do it, but it was certainly compared to the other books that we could be going through, this was one that I was sort of happy to kind of fill in. And actually this morning, Jerry and I tried to trick Mike into thinking that he had to backfill, and I almost went along with it too, but that was just the old Adam flaring up in me, so I decided to go ahead and do it. I am going to kind of go somewhat high level. Anybody who's done any of my other previous Bible studies knows that I like to really kind of dig deep. I'm going to try to go surface level through this pretty highly just because of the amount of chapters we have to get through. But I also want to make sure that it's meaningful to everybody. So if there's a point that you really want to dig deeper on, or we want to, don't let me skip over your favorite part. Let's make sure we'll stop and we'll go down through it. But I do have. And passes them off to somebody. Well, you weren't in here, but I told him as long as he's back for all of Song of Solomon, that's all I'm asking him. I'll take some Ecclesiastes. But I do have 8 pages of notes kind of typed up here, so we'll get through to how we get through, but I do have some parts highlighted that we might end up, if we're getting crunched for time, kind of rapid fire through. All right, so starting out in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and if we just want somebody just to read the whole chapter, verses 1 through 20.
loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also when goods increase, they are increased at keeping, and what good is there to the owner thereof, save the beholding of them with their eyes. The sleep of a labored man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail, and he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. As he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun, all the days of his life which God giveth him. For it is his portion. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat and to take his portion, and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the things.
All right, thank you. So I probably should start out with this, but Ecclesiastes kind of gets a bad rap as a kind of a depressing book, one that kind of really brings people down. It is never stated in here, but most people think it's written by Solomon. He also was written the majority of the book of Proverbs, also the wisest man ever lived. And it has a very different bent than Proverbs does, right? So Proverbs is kind of general rules for a better life, somewhat, that are applicable to just living better, where Ecclesiastes sort of takes God out of the equation and you kind of focus only on this life here, right? He mentions multiple times throughout the book of kind of under the sun. And that is, again, that's kind of removing God and looking at only our time here on earth, from the time that we're born to the time that we die, and everything that goes on in between it. And it can be, depressing if that's all things are, right? If this is it, if you lived your life and then, when you pass away, if nothing ever happens, this is all the time that you have to look forward to, then that's a depressing thought, right? That's one that Paul kind of mentions, in 1 Corinthians. So it can be, but it's also, you don't want to necessarily quote Ecclesiastes to somebody who doesn't necessarily know the Bible. Because they are truths, all right? They're obviously captured in here, but they're truths with a certain perspective, and you kind of really have to explain that perspective to somebody for them to be able to take out of Ecclesiastes, I think, what Solomon is trying to put forth, right? So when you're reading through this, there's going to be some things that kind of sound contradictory to what we think of today from the Christian perspective, and that's, I won't say because it is, but it probably is with that viewpoint of things are meaningless without God, right? If this is all you have, then yes, things are going to be unfair. Things aren't going to line up the way you think that they are. There's going to be trials that doesn't seem to make sense to us here. And again, when you remove God from the equation, then that can be a very kind of depressing thought. But running through here, so the first part of chapter 5 here, he talks about keep thy foot when thou goest into the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven, and thou upon the earth, and therefore let thy words be few. To me, that one is just, don't be rash with the things that you're speaking, right? Kind of watch your words. He's really kind of putting everybody into their place, right? God's in heaven, man's on the earth. We're going to go through there and he's going to talk about watching your vows. Definitely don't promise to do something and then certainly to God and then not follow through with your promise. That's not a good thing. In verse 3, he talks about, for a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by a multitude of words. I think that's talking about the doers versus the speakers, right? A dream cometh through a multitude of business. So like your effort that you put in there, the work, can make kind of your dreams true, but a fool whose voice is known by a multitude of words, just somebody who just constantly talks about doing something and then doesn't ever really kind of follow through with it. Then he talks about in verse 4 through 7 is about vows. So do not promise to do something and then not follow through with it. In verse 7, he talks about, for the multitude of dreams and many words, there is also diverse vanities, but fear thou God. Our quarterly writer put it in, the word dreams in verse 7 may refer to goals, ambitions, and desires someone may have in life. Person who has enough desire but for something, but lacks the proper work ethic that might find himself using words which they describe as vanity. So again, just somebody who wants to, who's very kind of flippant with their words, right? Whether that's making vows, that's telling everybody about the big things that they're going to do. It's just somebody who doesn't put a lot of stock into what they say. They more want to just kind of puff themselves up to somebody else and, never really kind of follow through, and then they're just kind of on to the next thing. And then 8 through 9, if thou seest the oppression of the poor, the violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at that matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all, and the king himself is served by the field. So obviously in this life, there's a hierarchy of, just people on the planet, right? He talks about the kings kind of as being the highest, and when they pervert justice, when they're doing something that's not right, here on earth, that's a very unfair thing, but just know that there's somebody that's higher than them, right? There's the Lord regardeth it, and at the end of it, it's even the king is served from the field, right? So even the servants out there who are picking out the food for the king to eat. So there's a hierarchy, but it's kind of cyclical, right? Like there's a circle that the servant who has to listen to all these other people up before him, before it gets to the king, well, even the king is fed by the work of that servant. So I think that Solomon kind of saying that there's at least a little bit of justice here on earth, even if, again, you remove God from the equation. But as it says that, even the highest regard us. So when an injustice is done, nothing gets past God. That's all marked down. In verse 10, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. Obviously, everybody knows that the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Nobody's ever satisfied with just enough. Like, oh, I got the perfect amount of money. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. It's always more. Greed is one of the big motivators in this world. No matter how much you increase, there's always more out there that you want. In verse 11, when goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? So even as somebody does kind of gather up more wealth and things that they own in this life, they increase, but then that also takes more resources to keep them, right? So as the business grows, you have to hire more employees, which means you got more people to take care of, which means you have to then have a better profit than you did last year. And it's a constant increase. There's never a time that you can just sit back and necessarily enjoy all that you've had, except for just kind of looking back and kind of marveling at all the things that you've accomplished. But, certainly at this time when there's, we bought new fields, now we got to hire more servants, which means there's more mouths to feed, which means I have to have a better yield. And, it's constantly increasing. In verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. I think this is the classic mo money, mo problems situations he got. So he talks about the laboring man. So that is somebody who's doing work, right? It's not like in Proverbs, the slothful person, the sluggard. This is talking about somebody who is going in and he is working, but he's probably just getting enough for what he needs for that day. Once he gets it, even though he might not have a full belly, he goes and he sleeps well because he worked hard and he kind of provided for himself and for his family. But the abundance of the rich suffer him to sleep, right? So the more that you gather, the more responsibilities you have, the more things there are to just, there's never time to sit back and just enjoy, right? You're just constantly worried about the next thing, whether that's a business meeting or that's a deal that you got going on. There's always something to consume your worries and your time with the more that you kind of gather. All right, 13 through 17. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail. And he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. As he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? As the days also eateth in darkness, he hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. So here, I don't want to call it like a parable. I don't know if this is something that Solomon kind of witnessed. I kind of chunked this up. To me, that seems like a one whole story, right? But he's essentially talking about people who kind of gather riches, but it's to their detriment. Rather, it's it could be, it's bad for their health. Their riches become a burden, whether that just is all that they ever think about and do, and they just work themselves to death, whatever it may be. But it's somebody who has riches, and it's affecting them negatively. But then he also talks about that they lose those riches. So the riches perish for whatever reason. It says an evil travail, right? That's what I remember reading. So something happened, those riches had left him, and you would think, okay, well, good, that person was holding on to them, and it was negatively affecting him, but now those are gone, so we should have, a little bit more peace. But no, it says then he, has a son, that there's nothing for that, for him to inherit it. So it seems like, it speaks a little bit like kind of how it speaks in Job, right? Where naked he came and naked will I return. Job was looking at it like positive, right? It all belongs to God. He decided to take it away from me. That was his right. This man seems to go the opposite way. It says that they as things leave him and he has his family, either he kind of forsook his family to go kind of rebuild his fortune, or his family just left him because that was all that he was doing. But all he wanted to do was kind of build back his riches, is kind of the way that I read that. And it says at the end of it that he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow, and wrath with his sickness. So it seems like there was nothing for him to, like, he didn't have a family. Either he was still completely destitute and couldn't have, candles to, like a lamp to eat by, he ate in darkness. But he was, like, that was all that consumed him, was having those riches, and it seemed like building them back. All right. Yes, sir.
Anything you have more than your necessities is really
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point. It's either First Timothy or Second Timothy, right? But he talks about food and raiment is kind of all that we really need, right? That's our essentials. And anything else above that is just by the grace of God. That
And when you die, it's just there.
that's it. It's just there. Yeah. Yeah. And we don't get to it in these chapters. It's in the previous chapters from last week, but it talks about, you've spent all your time building up all this wealth, and then you pass on, and who knows who's going to get it after you, right? The fool, like you build up all this stuff, and then somebody else comes and takes it, and like they just come and they do whatever they want with it. It's theirs now. Yeah, yeah, death taxes.
Those who are wealthy today inherited it, and it is passed down generation to generation, and that is not true.
Yes,
If you go back to the early 1900s, Musk, the name Musk, or Gates, or Walton, you go down the list of the wealthiest people, and their families did not. That's new money.
yes,
But that means that those from the 1900s who were rich, Cornelius Vanderbilt, died in poverty. And he was the wealthiest man in the U.S. And you can go down the list. There are some rare exceptions, but even those exceptions, the Rockefellers and those, their wealth has been diluted because it's been broken up and split among the inheritors. And over time, many of them have squandered wealth. Wealth is when you have a lot of money, you have the risk of losing it. When you don't have money, you learn how to live without money. And that's a skill set. And it passes through your entire life. So, again, reinforcing.
yeah, and I think that was why, again, that section we kind of just went over, it was, we're told to be content, right? And that's the big thing that people are missing. When you put all your effort and your time into riches and a number in a bank account or the goods that you have, then you're missing the entire point of it. You're not content with anything. You're always wanting to kind of add more to what you have. And then, again, it could have just been the way I was reading it, but then when somebody like that loses it, then that's all that they think about. Again, we're told in that, I'm going to call it like a parable. I don't know if that's what that is or not, but that person had a family, right? They had a son, which most likely meant they had a wife of some kind. But at the end of his time, he was eating in darkness, he was in sorrow, he was in poor health. And again, that could either be that he was trying to rebuild his fortune and his family just left him because they had no time for him, or, even worse, he left his family to kind of go focus on rebuilding what he had because that's where he put all his stock in. That was how I read it.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, first, we don't have very many kings today. We look at governments, and I know there's an uproar. There's a lot of concern about what's happened in New York, with bringing in a new mayor. There are governments that I prefer one over another, and yet people survived under kings. Many people survived, a lot didn't, under communism. A lot were put to death. But all of those governments go in cycles. Russia was not always communist. And here too, you find governments shifting and changing. It is man's predicament, again, going back to absent God, we do some stupid stuff. And we base our lives on the circumstances around us when we really should not. We should base our lives on God.
Right. But if you remove God from the equation and all you're left with is here, then it's very easy to get miserable and weighed down. I very distinctly remember after my salvation how much peace I had in things, because it was just with the way the world was going. And I mean, we'll get into my testimony, not today, but I mean, I'll tell it to anybody. But I mean, I was on the left, I was in all that, and I distinctly remember coming out of it and how much better I was afterwards, because it's so easy to just get wrapped up into everything that's going on here and it's not going your way and you feel like things are going down, and to just really get depressed and angry with everything that's happening. That's what leads to violence and spending your days off and protests and everything else. That's what you think you ought to do because there's nothing after this, so this is your only focus. And it's a very depressing way to kind of spend your time concerning that. Exactly right. Coming down here, so in verse 18, behold that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of his labor, and he that taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God hath given him for his portion. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart. So what it seems like is saying here is, well, if there is nothing else, if you spend your time here, then you might as well just live it up. What I like about this is, at least he's willing to recognize that everything that we have is a gift of God. The days of his life, which God hath given him, for it is his portion. So yeah, this is a rare glimpse of when Solomon kind of pulls God back into the equation, and you realize that everything you have is expressly because this is what God has given to you for your time here. In chapter 6, it's a short chapter. If we just read the whole thing, 1 through 12.
This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. If a man beget 100 children and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he had no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than a keep. For he cometh in with vanity and departed in darkness, and his name shall be purple. Moreover, he cannot see the sun, nor know anything. This hath more rest than the other. Yea, though he live 1,000 years twice old, yet hath he seen no good, and not all those who are bliss. All the labor of man is for his mouth, yet the appetite is not good. For one hath the wise more than more that knoweth too long. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wondering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. That which hath been is named already, and it is known that is man. Neither may he content with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in this life, all the days of his vain life, which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun?
Yeah, thank you, Hope. So here we have a maybe arguably the most depressing chapter of what we're going to go through. But he talks about that there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men, a man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him no power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity and is an evil disease. So somebody who is blessed with everything that they have no want within them, everything's taken care of, but then they are also they're not able to enjoy it, right? They either die or they become an invalid or whatever happens. Somebody else ends up taking all that from him. And Solomon points out, that's not right. That's, he calls it an evil, that it's, it's obviously, it's not a fair thing. And then he goes on that if a man beget 100 children and live many years, so as the days of his years be many. Obviously at this time, children, right? So 100 children, like that's a massive amount, right? Children are, even we look at children is a blessing here, but back in that time, it was an outward blessing from everybody. The more children you have, then obviously you were very blessed. And he lives many years, and his days be many, but the soul is not filled with good, and he had no burial. So burial was also it was seen as a very negative thing if you were unable to be buried, right? If you couldn't go and be put in a sarcophagus somewhere and in your family tomb, it was a negative thing. So this man, even though he is blessed, he is not filled with good, and he's not able to have a burial. Then, according to what Solomon says here, an untimely birth is better than him. So even like a stillborn baby, you'd rather essentially be that stillborn baby than live this man's life who had all these things, but his end was so terrible that he had no good in his life, and then at the end he wasn't even able to be buried. That's obviously a huge exaggeration, right? That to say that there's nothing good in that person's life.
I think this, we're coming from Christmas season, Christmas Carol, the story, Charles Dickens.
Sure. Big fan.
Who kind of fits this description. He was solely bent on building up wealth, never spent it, never did good for others. That's the description here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a really good application of kind of what we're seeing, right? Somebody who has everything that they need, but he's just miserable all the time. And what turned him around was, seeing a glimpse of his death and how everybody reacted around him and all that. And then, yeah, it's a good point of what we talked about earlier, right? All those riches and wealth would have went to somebody, and who knows what his motives or intent would have been when he had them. But Solomon goes on, for he cometh with vanity and departeth, I'm in verse 4, in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Moreover, he had not seen the sun, nor known anything. This has more rest than the other. He's talking about the stillborn baby, right? He's never even seen the sun, but he has more rest where he is now than this person who had all these great things, but then had a miserable end. Yea, though he live 1,000 years, twice told, hath he not seen the sun? Has he not seen no good? Do not go all into one place. So again, if you take God out of the equation and all you ever look at is death, like a hole in the ground with a tombstone, then, you probably want to, okay, well, the one who died young, who didn't get to experience all this miserable and terribleness in life, it probably is better than somebody who was rich and miserable all the time, but then, you have the same end. Obviously, again, I want to say that this is excluding God in our lives and eternity coming afterwards. This is just saying that, death is the end of everything. So you'd rather be this little baby who never had a bad day in his life than somebody who just had everything, but just constantly miserable all the time. And wasn't even surrounded by loved ones, nobody to bury him. So again, it's a very depressing. Verse 7, all the labor of a man for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. So all he does is for his own pleasure, for his own being able to eat and to drink and be merry, all that. Yet his appetite's never filled. He has to continually do it. He has to continually have more wants and things that, he would want in this life. Probably check my notes over here, but you'll work, but you'll be hungry again tomorrow. And then in verse 8, for what hath the wise more than the fool, and what the poor than the living, or than knoweth to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. So he's talking about, what hath the wise man more than the fool? So at the end of the day, there's two people up here. One has all this wisdom. One's a fool person. What's really the difference between the two? Essentially everything that the wise person can do, the poor and the fool person can also do. And they both go to the grave. Yeah, there's the same end to them all. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. So better to have what you have right here in front of you than all these things that you want and you desire. That's vexation and vanity of spirit. vanity and vexation of spirit. That which has been named already is known, and it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? All right, chapter 7. It's a relatively long one. If we just want to, I'll try to speed up some of this. So chapter 7 is, there's not any real long stories in this one. It's very kind of piecemeal. It's very similar to Proverbs. But again, it's Proverbs for living under the sun, right? So again, the perspective that there is no eternity. It's all just things that are here and now, and this is all that there's ever going to be. So there are some truths in it, right? I mean, the very first one is a good name is better than precious ointment, right? So like having a good reputation is better than having these valuables and these riches. And the day of death better than the day of one's birth. So that first part is obviously very true, right? Having a good reputation. And then he says the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. And I'll say that's kind of true. That's not how Solomon meant it here, but I mean, for a fact, my day of death, I don't know the day itself, but right afterwards, immediately afterwards, it's going to be better than my birth for sure. But then he talks about it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, for it is the end of all men and the living in the way of his heart. Then next he talks about sorrow is better than laughter, and that's essentially saying that, you know, if gathering wisdom and what we have here is really what's important, then things like funerals and being sorrowful kind of help you reflect on what's important, right? And you kind of focus your time on things of this life that need to improve versus it talks about you know, the house of mirth in verse 4, you know, versus going and just enjoying life and having a party doesn't really give you time to focus on the things that need to improve in your life. Yeah, perspective. That's exactly the word. Let's see here.
Interesting to see it. I know we've all been there. It's all been our family at one point, but to see all of the cars lined up at the house and know that they are there together taking stock. And I think an important thing in this lesson, and we keep going over it as well, I think we were talking about it, especially in chapter 5, but you know, you can have all these riches, but are you spiritually rich? Are you rich with your family? My grandma was a penny pincher. I mean, you were to do that. She water on her make it spread. Voices in the back of my head. You have time for that? Are you, you know, should save that money and put it for something else. So I think that is not only a life lesson, but I do really think that spending your money wisely and using the money that God has blessed you with to bless others, and not expecting anything in return, not expecting to have somebody, you know, give you notoriety for what you've done. I think that is something that is a huge lesson here, and I need to be better at it. And I know there's others too, but taking stock of the things that you do have, and a death does that
Mm-hmm.
more than anything. You lose someone
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on here is, yeah, most of us don't reflect on things like that until something does happen. And then you sit back and, you mentioned all the cars in the driveways, right? Like that's when most family comes together, right? I mean, there's people that I haven't seen since, a death in the family, however many years ago. It just kind of forces people to stop what they're doing and kind of go and visit and, again, reflect on what's actually important in this life versus, just a constant rat race or hustle or whatever we're in all day long. And yeah, then the same goes money, right? Like until a huge expense comes along that nobody was planning for, and now you have to give out money, you don't think about, okay, all the wasted stuff I've spent it on in the past that I could, I'd rather have that back here now than, a closet full of stuff that just sits around and kind of collects dust. All right, handful more minutes here. So let's see, if we jump ahead to chapter 8, so I'll just do kind of little sections here. So chapter 8 and verse 6, because to every purpose there is a time and a judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. For he knoweth not which it shall be. For who can tell him when it shall be? There is no man that hath the power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, neither hath the power in the day of death. There is no discharge in that war, neither shall wickedness deliver those who are given to it. So just kind of the same thing that Hope was just talking about, right? An unexpected death. Like nobody knows when that time's going to be for any of us, right? And even if we did know who has the power to stop it, right? None of us. So, because of that, you can, if that's all you focused on, was just whatever time we have left here, that can be a very miserable experience, right? If you, again, remove eternity from the equation and that's all you're focused on, then that wouldn't leave it'd be pretty miserable for most of us, I think. And then if we kind of jump down to let's do I guess 14. There is a vanity which is done under the earth, and there is a just man upon whom it happeneth according to the work of the wicked. Again, there is wicked men to whom it happeneth according to his work of the righteousness. I said, this is also a vanity. Then I commended mirth, because of man hath no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry, for there shall abide in him of his labor the days of his life, which God giveth him under the sun. Then I applied mine heart to know wisdom, and to see the business that is done upon the earth. For also there is neither day nor night sleep with his eyes. Then I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor and seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Yea, further, though the wise of man think to know it, then shall not he be able to find it. So here it's kind of what we were talking about, but if all you ever focused on was the time that you have left, your impending death at some point in this life coming up on you, then instead of cutting coupons and pinching pennies, why not just spend it all? Just spend all your time partying, right? Paul talks about if there's no resurrection, then we might as well eat, drink, and, be merry here, because that's all that there is. Why put anything in a 401k? Why have any savings? Just blow it all, because today may be your last day, and maybe the day after. It's kind of a very nihilistic way to look at it. As Solomon kind of goes through this, he talks about that he applied his heart to know wisdom. That's in verse 16, to see the business that is done on the earth. So then when Solomon has that realization that why shouldn't you just spend everything that you have and just enjoy every moment, so now he really wants to kind of focus on why things are the way that they are. So it talks about that he didn't sleep night or day, that all he really wanted to do was to try to get wisdom and try to understand this. And then verse 17, then he beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. who can truly know God's ways and why he does what he does. That's kind of the realization that he comes to, because though a man labor to seek it out, so even though he tries real hard, yet he shall not find it. Yea, further, though the wise man thinks that he knows it, yet shall he not be able to find it. So just somebody who thinks that they're wise, that thinks that they understand God's ways and why he does what he does, there's absolutely no way for them to know that. And Solomon, the wisest of all of us, couldn't figure it out. God's ways are higher than our ways. There's just, in the first part of verse 9, it kind of continues running here. Someone wants to read verses 1 through 6 of chapter 9.
This is an evil among all things that are done under the sun. There is one inventor to all. They also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live, and after that they go to the dead. For to him that is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a reward. For the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love and their hatred and their envy is now perished. Neither have they any more of fortune, for never anything that is done under the sun.
All right, so here I think it's a continuation of the last part of chapter 8, because he starts out with, for all this I considered. So all the wisdom, the effort that he was putting in beforehand, now he's considering in his heart that even to declare all this, that the righteousness and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. No man knoweth either love or hatred by all things that are before them. So, most everybody, and certainly the lost, consider themselves as good, right, versus wicked. But you can never, from this perspective, never know your standing with God, right? You put all your works in. Oh, I'm a good person, so God likes me. Well, you can't tell, certainly by what's before you, by the way that you're blessed in this life, has no bearing on your standing with God. Because he talks about later on that everything's the same. So whether you're good or you're wicked, you're clean or you're unclean, to those that sacrifice, to those who have never sacrificed, it's the same kind of outcome the way you are. So there's no, essentially I think this is a good picture of kind of what Hope was talking about earlier, that there's no way that, works won't save you. We obviously know that to be true. But even here in a under the sun kind of world, your good works and your bad works, it all goes down to the same place at the end. You can't know your standing with God. So he talks about a living dog is better than a dead lion. At least when you're alive, there's something you can do about it. There's some more you can do, even though you don't know you're standing with him. But once you're dead, that's all you got. Once you're dead, there's no hope of salvation after that, right? From our perspective, this is all you got. You only got right this second. We only know the rest of today, what it's going to bring. But this is your only one chance to accept salvation for sure, because who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of minutes. And you can't think that, well, I've been blessed up to here, so God must really love me, or I've had negative things happen in my life, I must be at odds with God. It's the things that are right in front of you have no bearing. You can't tell whether you're loved or hated from all this before him. But yeah, right now this is the only chance, right? We know that our works have no bearing on it. It's all about the the grace is given to us, the sacrifice has been made, and the accepting of it, and the applying it to our own account. Continuing on, so just a quick summary of kind of the rest of it. So as he goes through the rest of chapter 9, he gets kind of discouraged again with the way things are in his life, and he talks about you should just be decked in white all the time, right? As black is kind of mourning, so white would be kind of cheerful, the opposite of that. And you should just enjoy life and everything else that goes under the sun. But again, obviously, we know that that's not prudent to our future. In 12, he talks about no man knoweth his time, just the way that a fish is swimming in the sea and then it gets swooped up in a net, or the birds are caught in a snare. None of us know the evil time that will suddenly fall upon us. So, and this, without God in the equation, we might as well just enjoy everything that's going on before us. He talks about there's a parable of a small city that gets besieged, and then somebody has a wise idea and they end up saving the city, but nobody remembers that person, right? So even though there's a city that's saved, nobody thinks about that person. There's no statue or holiday or anything. And then in verse 10, it's just another series of these under the sun kind of parables, that things are true if you remove God out of the equation, and it's a very negative kind of outlook on life here under the sun without God in it. All right, any other closing thoughts?